Hey guys, my name is Dean, and today we're going to talk about Panic at the Disco, more specifically centering in on Brendon Urie, who's the band's lead singer and lead songwriter. So, a bit of an overview. We're going to talk about Brendon Urie's early and high school life, then get into the start of Panic at the Disco as a band. Then we're going to go through all of the albums by his band, Fever You Can't Sweat Out, Pretty Odd, Vices and Virtues, Too Weird to Live, Too Rare to Die, Death of a Bachelor, and his most recent, Pray for the Wicked. This organization is centered around Brendon Urie's music due to us looking at him not only as a person but as a musician. Going by album helps put the music in perspective of the things that were happening in his life at the time. After that, we're going to touch on one of Brendon Urie's passions, his support for the LGBTQ+ community. This is the last thing we're going to hit on, as it involves one of his most recent media spotlights. On to the early life of Brendon. He was born on April 12th, 1987 in St. George, Utah, by parents Grace and Boyd Urie. He was the youngest of 5 children. His family moved to Las Vegas, Nevada when he was 2 years old, and this may come as a surprise to anyone who listens to Urie's music, but the singer grew up in a Mormon household. For the first 17 years of Brendon Urie's life, he studied the Mormon faith. This would later cause an appearance of religious aspects in the singer's songs. In Brendon Urie's high school years, he was bullied. Brendon described himself as the eccentric kid or the spaz of his high school, but he never took it to heart. He had much bigger issues at hand. When he was 17, Brendon decided to leave the Mormon church. He sat down with his parents and told them, "Hey, I'm leaving the church. I don't really believe in these practices, and I'm not even sure if I believe in God." That obviously didn't go over too well, and he was temporarily kicked out of his house. Another thing that was coming up at this time was the very beginning of Panic at the Disco as a band. So, Panic at the Disco originally got its start in 2004 when Brendon was 17. He worked at a smoothie shop to be able to afford the practice space and would actually be requested to sing for tips. As to how the band actually started, Brendon and Brent Wilson, then bass player, met at Palo Verde High School, where Brendon went to school, and Wilson approached him about playing guitar for his band. Brendon accepted, but when they heard him sing, he was almost immediately reassigned to be the lead singer. A little later, in 2005, after being sent a link to their website, Pete Wentz, the Fall Out Boy, actually signed Panic to his record label, which was then named Decadence Records. Panic at the Disco is still actually signed to this label, it's just that the label is under a different name. So, getting into Panic's albums, A Fever You Can't Sweat Out was released in September of 2005 to Decadence Records. It's been described as dance punk and pop punk, but truth be told, I don't even know what genre this album should be classified as. It covers a multitude of issues within its lyrics, a lot having to do with certain religious topics. This album was made with all the original band members, Brendon, Ryan Ross, Brent Wilson, and Spencer Smith. This album later went on to win double platinum, with tracks such as one of their most famous, I Write Sins Not Tragedies, and others like The Only Difference Between Martyrdom and Suicide is Press Coverage, Lying is the Most Fun a Girl Can Have Without Taking Her Clothes Off, and Build God Then We'll Talk. Needless to say, they had some pretty interesting song titles that were designed to catch the eye of people. Brendon and Ryan worked really close on this album, with Ryan writing the lyrics and Brendon composing the music. Their second album, Pretty Odd, was produced in 2008 with Ryan Ross, Brendon Urie, Spencer Smith, and new bass guitarist John Walker. The album gives off a quote-unquote hippie vibe and has been described as psychedelic rock and folk rock, very 70s. The recurring theme you'll see in Panic's music is that no album is like the other one. Their sound is constantly changing, and this is the first time we see that, as Pretty Odd is nothing like their debut album. You probably wouldn't even know they were by the same band if it weren't for Urie's unique vocals. A track from this album called Night in the Afternoon went on to win double platinum, and the album as a whole spent 18 weeks on the Billboard 200. With this album, Panic started gaining gradual popularity, and it's kept up through the years. During this album, Brendon starts to take a part in the songwriting instead of only doing musical composition. So their third album, Vices and Virtues, was produced in 2011, which was a year after Ryan Ross and John Walker left the band. This is what prompted Urie to start finding his own voice and take the lead in songwriting, with tracks such as Ballad of the Mona Lisa, Trade Mistakes, and Sarah Smiles. This album is described as having a pop rock vibe, and the lyrics centered on topics such as manipulation and love. The album itself earned number 7 on the Billboard 200. The official band members of this time were Brendon Spencer and new guitarist Dallin Weeks, who joined Panic as they were going on tour for this album. The album itself was recorded as a duo, with Brendon and Spencer producing all the sounds and playing all the instruments on the tracks. This album was made under 2 labels, Decadence and Fueled by Ramen. To this day, they are still currently signed to both of those labels. Another pretty big thing that happened during this time was that Brendon Urie got engaged to his now wife, Sarah. Actually, during the writing of this album, Brendon wrote the song Sarah Smiles in order to impress her. And I guess it worked. Moving on, Too Weird to Live, Too Rare to Die really brought out a new wave of popularity to Panic at the Disco in 2013. This album was generally described as having an indie rock vibe, and the band members were the same members featured in Vices and Virtues, only Dallin Weeks was now involved in the production and songwriting of this album. This album features tracks such as Girls, Girls, Boys, Colorful, and This Is Gospel, which was actually written about Spencer's ongoing drug problem at the time. Brendon and Sarah got married in 2013, just after his birthday, and right before the release of this album in October. So an ongoing theme that you see in his music is love. Brendon also started experimenting with the visual elements of his music videos, appearing completely naked in the music video for Girls, Girls, Boys, which you can see a picture of on the right. So now we're going to get into The Death of a Bachelor. This was Panic's 6th studio album, released in 2016. Over the period of time between this album and the last one, Brendon became the sole member of Panic at the Disco. Brendon Urie is Panic at the Disco now, which is why at the beginning of this I said that we were focusing in mainly on him and not the other band members, because now there are no other band members. So throughout this album, Brendon Urie is responsible for all guitar, bass, keyboards, drums, and of course vocals in the tracks, except for the drums in Hallelujah. So most of this record he did completely on his own, and was of course the lead songwriter. This album features tracks like Death of a Bachelor, LA Devotee, House of Memories, Victorious, and Don't Threaten Me with a Good Time, which was actually released earlier than the album on Christmas Eve, given that the album was released in mid-January the following year. So sometime during the era of this album, Brendon took a break from Death of a Bachelor to star on Broadway in Cyndi Lauper's Kinky Boots. He played a British man named Charlie Price and wore very red high-heeled boots, much to the play's name, and I am more than happy to show you a picture of that on the right. The boots go all the way up to his upper thighs, and I must say, it's a great look. But back to the album, Urie experiments with a lot of different sounds on this album, more than usual, I'd say, and the album was largely inspired by Frank Sinatra, who is one of Urie's most favorite singers. This has led the album to be described as both jazz and alternative rock. The album reached #1 on the Billboard 100 and was nominated for Best Rock Album at the Grammys, since technically Panic at the Disco is a rock band. The album has since been certified platinum. By this time, both Brendon, Urie and Panic at the Disco had become a household name. I'm serious, guys. Even my grandparents know who Brendon, Urie is. But we're gonna move on to Panic at the Disco's most recent album, Pray for the Wicked, which was released at the end of June of 2018. So as of this week, aka August 4th, Pray for the Wicked is ranking number 17 on the Billboard 200, but it debuted at #1 when it released. It includes tracks like Hey Look Ma, I Made It, Say Amen Saturday Night, Fuck a Silver Lining, and High Hopes. Urie is currently on tour with Hayley Kiyoko in Arizona. This album gives off a really dancey vibe, being described as pop rock, jazz, and alternative rock, and was certainly influenced by his time on Broadway. So now we're going to get into Urie's involvement in the LGBT community. He's been showing support for the community for years, even to the point where it impacted his music, which can be seen with the making of Girls, Girls, Boys. This song gave the story of a love triangle with conflicting sexualities, and one of the lyrics being, "Love is not a choice." Ever since then, fans have organized stadium-wide rainbow lights with colored paper being passed out to every section for fans to put over their phone lights when this song plays. During every live performance of this song, Brendon also has a rainbow flag that's passed up to the stage that he either wears or puts around his mic stand or waves around the stage. Right after the release of Pray for the Wicked, Brendon pledged $1 million to Glisten, which is an organization that helps keep schools safe and welcoming for LGBT students. At the same time, he came out as pansexual, which was a really big moment for him. And when he came out, he actually referenced Girls, Girls, Boys, saying that love is not a choice, which he firmly believes. He is still married and very in love with his wife. So that's all I got for you. If you want to know where I got my pictures from, all of them are listed on this slide, and all of the album covers that you've seen I got from Amazon. And here are more references that I used to kind of touch up the knowledge that I already knew, as well as fill in some blanks and fact check. So thank you guys so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed listening to me talking about Brendon Urie for 13 minutes. He really is a trailblazer in every single thing that he does, and is a serious culture icon. So I really hope that I did okay in explaining all of that. And that's all I got, so I hope you enjoyed this video, and I am signing off now. Later!